Hi, everyone. Welcome to Bridging the Humanities and Healing, a podcast that explores how educators, creators, and thought leaders use the humanities to foster resilience for students affected by adverse childhood experiences. This is your host, Amara Mufwa, and today's episode, we're diving into the prison education system. This summer, I had the opportunity to work with Georgetown Prisons and Justice Initiative, an initiative designed to advance opportunities for those affected by mass incarceration. One of the programs that I had the honor to work within was Georgetown's BLA, Bachelor's of Liberal Arts program, designed to aid incarcerated individuals to receive their bachelor's in the liberal arts. I worked as a teaching assistant for the life writing course, a course taught inside a correctional facility. So the BLA program essentially brings education into a prison setting. So this podcast is going to explore how we as educators were kind of able to work with and around the system to provide these incarcerated students with the quality education that they deserve. So I can't begin this episode without giving you a little bit more background to who's going to be our next guest on this podcast today. He is a novelist, a playwright, an incredible and kind-hearted teacher. I had the amazing opportunity to work alongside him as a TA for the life writing course at Patuxent. And so, yeah, let's get this episode started and we can reveal who our next guest is going to be. Today, I'm joined by Professor Dennis Williams, the Life Writing's course instructor and co-architect. Together, we'll explore how writing can help mediate adverse childhood experiences, often called ACEs, and how incarcerated students are using storytelling to reclaim their narratives, connect across difference, and resist carceral logics. Professor Williams, thank you for being here.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Okay, to start off, can you share the vision behind this life writing course and what inspired you to teach in a carceral setting?
Okay. Well, the course was actually created by Emily Haynes as the who's now, I guess, the program director,
Right.
as the first of a three-course writing sequence for the Bachelor of Liberal Arts degree in the prison program. She taught it with the first cohort, the first time. Um, uh, the, it was during that time that I first learned about the BLA program, and I came in to visit her class, doing this course
Mhm.
with cohort one. Um, and I had heard good things about it, and I enjoyed the class. And I agreed to come on board to teach that first class with the second group of students. I taught it with the second, third, and fourth cohorts. What inspired me to do it, I had not done carceral education before, but since I had been teaching sort of as an adjunct for years at Georgetown while I was working in student affairs. When I stopped working full time, and I didn't have the same kind of connection with the students outside of class, it started to lose some of its appeal.
Yeah.
A lot of the teaching I had taught was with sort of non-traditional Georgetown students. It was through, this is a long answer for the question, but I'll
It's
get there.
okay.
It was through something called the Community Scholars Program, which would, I suppose, now be called a DEI initiative.
Yeah.
Um, it was a special program where we admitted and educated and supported cohorts of students who were first generation students, mostly students of color, usually low income students. Um, and um, and so I taught the class, their first class. We had a class set up for the summer program and then the first semester. And I taught that class along with Elizabeth Velez. We taught them separately. And then I also had, through my full-time job in student affairs, and running the program, I had a lot of contacts. I had good relationships with the students. Um, After I stopped doing that, then it was just sort of teaching regular Georgetown students, which I found boring. In comparison, I
In
had actually
comparison.
I had reached out to area community colleges
Yeah.
to try and recreate some of what I was doing through community scholars. And so I was in the process of doing that when Elizabeth and I had lunch with Dean Joe Napolitano, who was one of the architects of the BLA program, who had been a TA for both of us in community scholars like 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So he told us about this program. They were recruiting teachers. So I signed up. So that's how I came to be teaching the class. I wanted something um, that felt more meaningful to me than teaching. Because the advantage of a lot of the teaching I had been doing was teaching people who had been systematically and historically excluded from selective higher education.
Right.
And that population within the larger Georgetown population. Um, and without having regular access to them, I was looking for something like that. I wanted to sort of I didn't want to teach sort of the usual suspects in higher education, people who would have been there anyway.
Right. No.
And these students fit that bill. They are people who would not who probably did not see themselves ever enrolling in Georgetown 2 years ago, um, as opposed to people who sort of grew up fully knowing they were going to Georgetown.
Right. No, it makes sense. I feel like when
Right.
you don't think you have access to an education, like it just, I guess, raises
Yeah.
the value you would want to
Mhm.
have within that experience rather than
Right.
just I'm using this for a job or I'm using
Right.
this just to make my parents happy or
Right.
something like that.
Right. Check a box and bide my
Right.
time because
Exactly.
you
Exactly.
know.
So, I guess kind of going off of that, we teach life writing within
Mhm.
Patuxent Institution. Life writing covers family histories, interviews, memoirs, essays,
Mhm.
the whole
Mhm.
shebang. Why do you feel like this genre is particularly suited to supporting
Well,
students who have experienced
it,
trauma?
you know, it actually perfectly mirrors the approach we took with community scholars, where the first essays that we had them working on at the beginning of it was a summer session, very intensive. It was like every day for like 2 or 3 hours for 5 days for 5 weeks. And then they also continued in the fall as the same class. So the first thing we worked on in the summer was a personal essay. Um, so this fits perfectly. It had several beneficial purposes. One, just from writing, it's an easy, natural way for people to sort of get something out on paper so that you can start having something to work with. In terms of it's an easy way to get sort of a baseline of people's writing skills, see the kinds of things that they need to work on, without without the students sort of struggling self-consciously with the form, right? Okay, how do I write an analysis of this poem, right? So it's something that they can just write, that they know themselves, they know their lives. Um, it's a really good first sample. It always has the added benefit of introducing the students to us as instructors. We learn more about them,
Right.
um, which allows us to relate to them better on a personal level.
Right.
And the real magic is that they learn about one another.
Right.
They end up sharing these things, and it's obviously very different from prison, but it's similar in the sense that they are living together. They are a cohort, and they need to sort of understand to know something about one another personally and as students. Now, and so it felt like a good, that was the approach that I had been using. It felt right in this setting. What I didn't know about was I imagined and still imagine that there are um, rules, codes of conduct within the prison, that are very different than on a college campus.
Right.
Um, and um, and I imagine that part of that is there can be not only a reluctance, but a kind of danger in becoming too vulnerable.
Right.
Um, and so I didn't know how much opening up to expect. I figured, I would learn something about them and, just sort of in terms of understanding their background, right? Where they came from, what they were doing before, just some basic biographical information I thought I would get, and that they would learn because the other thing about it's similar to a college class in that they are assembled.
Right.
It's not a bunch of people who already knew each other in the prison. Um, they apply from prisons around the state of Maryland. So they could be in any of several different places. And if they're admitted to the program, then they're transferred and then they all become a group together at Patuxent. But many of them don't know each other until the day before class starts.
Right.
So they're introducing themselves to one another. What I didn't expect, and this probably gets a little bit to some of your later questions, was how much they would be willing to be vulnerable and how much they would be open. You love it when that happens in any class and you get a sense of when you create a sense of bonding and a sense of safety.
Hmm.
Um, this was, and I told them, the most generous
Yeah.
kind of this the first class that I taught with this in this life writing course. It was the most generous experience that I'd ever had in a classroom. We taught what we discussed in like the second maybe the second week a piece by Bell Hooks. An autobiographical essay about becoming a writer, which dealt with a lot with childhood trauma,
Right.
about being sort of depressed, outcast, even suicidal, and the ways in which sort of writing had saved her life through a very difficult childhood, writing from darkness.
Right.
Um, and so we were discussing that piece. It's a 2 hour class. And about halfway through, it turned into a therapy session. It was
Yeah.
amazing. Like at least two people in the class of 25 talked about suicidal ideation.
Mm.
And at least one of them attempts at suicide. Um, I heard about, stories about, childhood trauma dealing with um, parental addiction, right? Um, just all kinds of just all kinds of things that people started sharing,
Right.
and it was beautiful. And they were very open and tolerant and welcoming to each other's stories, and it was great.
Yeah.
It was therapeutic for each of them who was sharing. It was meaningful. It was like and actually, in another context, I facilitate support groups. Um, it felt like a support group.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know, people sharing their stories. And it was great.
Yeah. I think also with our cohort, something I've noticed, which you may have like a different opinion about, is like the fact that we are so small. It
Mhm.
really does help to get more personal.
Yep.
And I'm sure like the students probably feel that way too. They're able to build like these friendships, however strained they
Mhm.
might be because of the environment, because it's
Mhm.
only eight of us. Um,
Yep.
So yeah, I think that also kind of just contributes to it as well, just having like that small classroom environment, but plus
Yeah.
the discussions we're having in them.
Yeah, so the difference in this class was small. Some of them, I think this group they were already in Patuxent when they applied,
Mm.
because they just went through a different process, so they were somewhat more familiar with each other. And this is the first class that I've had in the prison program that's actually half black and half white.
Yeah, I remember you
Uh,
saying that. Yeah.
yeah, and so that there's a sort of a different kind of open. I mean, there's always been like the first classes were like 25 students, and there were probably five or six white students in each of those classes.
Mm.
Um, so there was sort of a critical mass of
Right.
minority students, right?
Right.
Um, but this is as half and half. It feels, it feels a little different, but still they are, so they may be a little bit more careful with each other. But it has gotten pretty much to the same place, I think,
Yeah.
in terms of sharing.
Yeah. And I guess just kind of going off on just like you're obviously in a classroom where we're asking them to share personal stories about themselves, but
Mhm.
we're in a prison classroom. So
Mhm.
you kind of touch upon this a little bit, but if you can just dive a little bit more into how you kind of navigate that tension between vulnerability and security protocol when we're asking these students to share like deeply personal stories, especially in a setting like the correctional prison.
Yeah, there isn't much. There isn't much different that I do. Again, there's a whole sort of code of behavior that I know little about outside the classroom. I do get very much the sense that they individually and collectively see this as a refuge.
Yeah.
Um, this seems to be a place where, for the most part, um, they have all kind of made an unspoken decision to leave those rules behind. The prison behavior that they may go outside of class and sort of get their hard faces on.
Yeah.
But in there, they act like a class.
Yeah.
Um, and they know we don't talk about we don't talk about legal stuff. We don't talk about, what are you in for, any of that kind of stuff. Um, Along the way, several of them have let me know, either in conversation or in their writing, um, uh, what they're in for, what their sentences were, what led to them being incarcerated. Um, I've received several of those stories, mostly in writing, but always in context. So it never felt inappropriate.
All right.
I never specifically solicited that information.
Right.
And I was really surprised with the first group when I realized how many of them had life sentences.
Mm.
Um, which I would not, at the beginning of class, I'd ask them sort of why they wanted to do this, and they talked about bettering themselves and in various ways and doing it for their parents, doing it for their children. But speaking about it in ways that, just as a casual listener, you wouldn't have imagined that they didn't expect to leave.
Right. Seriously though.
Yeah, but so again, I don't do anything special. I just, I am non-judgmental. Don't show any favoritism. That, whatever, especially as they made it clear early on that there was a lot of very past trauma in the class that signaled to me particularly to be careful, to be sort of gentle with their lives. It wasn't a place to come in and be particularly, sarcastic or, it's like, okay, well, we're all going to be very, very, sort of very polite and mindful of one another. Um, and so I think that sharing early on, sort of cluing me into some of the real trauma. Now, with some of the students that we'd had at Georgetown in that program, there had been some, several of them had issues in their background, certainly compared to the majority of what you would expect in the majority of Georgetown students. They've had more difficult lives, but nothing like this. It was clear that they were working through stuff, and that the work that they were doing in class was part of that working through. A lot of them were, they came in eager to write or had already been writing or wanted to write more. And part of it was they wanted to, stories, poems, whatever. And they were writing out their stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I think also, and I want to kind of hear your opinions on this, if this might have changed like your way of teaching at all, like hearing how much they wanted to improve their writing, did that
Mhm.
kind of make you want to challenge them a little bit more?
Mhm.
And yeah, like,
Yeah.
trying to teach in the prison setting, we understand that they come from different educational backgrounds. But something I've noticed a little bit in our class, which I didn't know how they were operating in
Mhm.
other classes, is that we do challenge them. And I think they
Yeah.
are a little bit taken aback, but they're very appreciative of it.
Yes.
Was that something you intentionally did because of you knowing how much they wanted to, I guess, grow, or is that just something you already kind of came in with?
No,
Yeah,
I didn't necessarily know that ahead of time. You know, understanding, and this is the fourth class I've taught, and this is the third time I've done this first writing class. So I have come to expect them to be serious about the work and wanting to improve and wanting to be good writers. Um, the first class, I did not do a good job of that, because there were so many of them and I didn't have a TA, and just sort of dealing with 25 handwritten essays.
right.
And so I didn't have as many writing assignments, and the feedback wasn't as good.
Mm,
Um, since then, I've been able to pay more attention and to be more intentional and to sort of coach them up harder. To be, to push them more, to be more, some things um, that in a normal college setting, I might, um, not necessarily let go, but I might mention and just sort of expect them to catch on, or if sooner or later, one way or the other. But the sense of, okay, well, I need to correct this because they need to get this right because this is where they're going to learn this.
right,
And
right.
that's I like what you did with coming in with your lesson about verbs.
I think I
That's the
scared
kind of
them
thing
of
that
it.
that's what they need, and they
Yeah,
enjoy it. Yeah.
yeah. No, yeah. I think also kind of looking into how we've had like our various assignments. Can you kind of just like briefly speak to me about your different
Mhm.
perspectives with with these assignments, and like how you wanted them to take that with
Okay.
them and growing as writers.
Okay. Well, the two assignments that had been created before was the literacy narrative, sort of writing about their own experience as learners, right? How they develop their either love for or aversion to, books and reading and writing, sort of that
Yeah.
learning experience. And then the final, whereas they can do a piece of life writing modeled after one of the works we've done.
Mhm.
So I expanded that. And so I did the childhood story, which was, it reflected one of the early assignments. It's a nice it's a nice way to start in terms of a personal story.
Mhm.
Um, and I like it because that was actually my first assignment and my first day at college,
Really?
uh, was to write a story based to what was the first thing what's like your earliest memory or one of your earliest memories, and to write about it. Um, so a version of that. So I like that as an early assignment, for all the reasons I said before, to sort of get something out that they feel that they know, that they don't have to really think about. Um, the what are the other things? I like the idea of the public letter, having taught the James Baldwin letter to my nephew.
Mhm.
The idea of writing a letter to somebody but making a broader public point.
Yeah.
So I tried that with the second class I taught, and it went over really well. And they shared the letters in class, and like three or four of them were very emotional. Even they were very, one. She wrote a letter to her, I think it was her dead father,
Mm.
things like that. There were a couple of, parent letters and some, guy writing a letter to actually similar to the one that we just saw, a letter to his daughters, and there was some sort of custody stuff going on there. But that proved it was a good way for them to communicate. It was a comfortable means of communicating, and sort of and writing in that context, basically writing an essay about something, right? And writing an issue-based essay, but doing it in this context. And it worked pretty well. They were successful with that. The profile, again, was inspired by one of the readings, with the uh, interview questions.
Right.
Um, and I so I after I did the first class, I asked the class for some feedback, and I got some ideas, and so some of these were sort of partly drawn from some of those ideas.
Mhm.
But putting that together with the questions, the idea of them actually doing an interview, but then writing a profile, because they're reading all of these, self stories, but also the idea of, life writing can be a biography, not just an autobiography, right? So writing about somebody else. Um, and what I think was beneficial there, and most of them needed work on this, but we're able to point it out to them, is that it's easier to see when you're writing about somebody else than it is when you're writing about yourself, that you know you you're writing a story. You're making a point. Okay, so this is Um, like the one about you. So you seize on an aspect of the person that you think is particularly interesting and revealing, and you write about that part of the person, and you don't worry about everything else.
Mhm.
Um, and even if you had questions that related to some other stuff, you let that stuff go and you find where the story is and you focus on the story. And that was the message that I gave my class the other day. It's like, okay, well, you got all this information. What's the story?
Right.
um, and to be able to be sort of intentional about what you're writing, which goes back to what's the thesis of anything you're writing, right? So, what is it that you want to say in this particular piece of writing? What fits into that framework and what doesn't? And how do you shape it to support this point that you're making with this particular piece? Um,
Yeah. I feel like even with some of these essays, like, yeah, we're looking also at the structural way of how to write. But then in a way, it's also teaching them not only like just how to self-reflect, but with the interview one, you were kind of learning more about empathy. Um,
yes.
and that was something that I
Yes.
was like, interesting, because that was also something I personally felt like some of them were struggling to write about, but not necessarily that they didn't have the empathy, they just didn't know how to ask the right questions.
Yeah.
So I found that very interesting. But yeah, it was also interesting to read Kelly's for my own because in
Yeah.
a way I saw, okay, this is probably what they're gonna see if they read each other is like it
Mm.
helps you kind of analyze and experience in someone else's eyes. Like I didn't necessarily see my Taylor and Achilles, which my
Mm.
student wrote about,
Yeah.
as a positive experience.
Right.
And as I was sitting with Kelly, it almost felt like a literal therapy session, kind of like
Right.
you mentioned earlier, where he was like, "Oh, so this led to this, and that's why this is that." And I was like,
Right.
"Oh," I literally told him, I was like, "Oh, you helped me process that." Um,
Yeah,
so it's
yeah,
interesting with that assignment, just to see, and all of our
yeah.
assignments.
I think you're right. Empathy is a big part of it, and it opens them up to being, a little bit surprised. It's like, oh, okay,
Mhm.
I see you every day. I know a little bit about you. I didn't know that about you. Oh, that's kind of interesting. Let me sort of dig into that a little bit. I didn't know that you were a long range trucker and had been to all these places. Oh, okay,
Yeah.
it's kind of cool. I didn't know that you played, little league football and you had a coach that inspired you or whatever. It's like, okay, that's just yeah, it's seeing,
Other
uh,
identities.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and understanding where some of their motivations are.
Right. Very true.
Yeah.
Cool. And I guess just going off of our writings, can you just talk to me a little bit about kind of some of the responses we've seen from our students from the different authors, if there are any authors they gravitated towards, any authors they didn't enjoy as much? I feel like we already know the answer to that
Daniel didn't like anybody except Emily.
one.
Um, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I know Raja really liked Crazy Brave.
Yeah, she did.
Um, that one, the first time I taught it, that went over better than I had expected. Um, the Stephen King usually goes over well. It's easy to read. It's funny. It's got good sort of, moral of the story kind of things to it. So that usually goes over well. The Wes Moore book is really interesting, um, because it turns out that, in this context, in this class, um, that becomes a really good analytical exercise.
Right.
It it has less to do for them with the life stories, is that they are able to see kind of what the author is doing, the way the author is, you know, tilting the scale, making decisions in order to make in this case, he's making decisions that, as somebody was saying, they kind of um, make himself look a little better
Right.
by making the other guy look a little worse, but they can see that happening. They can see those choices in this context. Um, so, they have opinions about it, but it's really good for them to analyze what the writer is doing and the choices that the writer is making, why the writer is making them, and what is the effect of those choices. In this case, the effect has sort of real life consequences on both sides, right? They can see how what this writer has done has enhanced his own life, and they can see how it certainly hasn't helped the other person's life and maybe even made it worse in the sense that it's going to be harder for the guy to get a pardon
Yeah.
because because he can't give it to him.
Right.
Um, so that has actually become more. This is the second time I've done that, and that has become more interesting than I expected.
Hmm.
Um, what else? They liked the graphic novel.
Yeah, perceptive. I think
Um,
that was also my personal fave.
yeah, because it's very different. People don't aren't necessarily used to a lot of graphic novels, and what is interesting about that one is that it's not. It really is kind of comic strip-ish. Some graphic novels try to be more so the art is more sort of realistic. But no, it's really kind of two-dimensional comic strip. But it's dealing with really serious stuff. And so that juxtaposition and from the child's point of view, that becomes really fascinating.
Yeah.
Um, the Mary Carr excerpt is just sort of so sort of extreme and funny in the family dysfunction. Um, but yeah, I think the satrapi got a good response. The king got a good response. The boar got an interesting response. Useful, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I think those were probably like the
yeah,
ones they keep
yeah,
coming back to the most.
yeah, yeah. Mm.
So, I guess in your eyes, what do you feel like this course or just you teaching in this environment has kind of taught you overall about education and, the connections between writing, teaching, and healing?
Well, it has reaffirmed my belief in sort of educational equality and access because I don't know. This is what I teach. I teach English and writing, right? So I don't know about science and math and that kind of stuff. And obviously, different people have different aptitudes. But as far as what I teach and what I see about, because it's, the curriculum is not just English and writing. The curriculum includes, you know, um, there are science classes and there's social science classes and there's philosophy classes and there's language classes, and they are plowing through. They're getting it done. Um, and these are classes that are taught by people who teach other students on Georgetown's campus.
Mm.
And so, it reaffirms what I've always believed about higher education in that, people who talk about, merit and who deserves to be there and who has earned their place and who's good enough, that's all bullshit.
Yeah.
That people who are um, that there are all kinds of, there are people in Patuxent who are smarter than people at Georgetown.
I agree.
Um, not just more efficient and compliant and eager students, they are smarter. And um, we don't try to find the smartest people. That's nonsense. We can't let those people in because they're not competitive, they're not qualified. Anybody, I'm not suggesting that anybody could do it. It's sort of like Stephen King. It's not like anybody could do it, but a lot more people can do it than people think. And it has as much to do with um perseverance, uh, has as much to do with that as it does with, whatever cells you were born with in your brain in terms of, intellect or IQ or whatever.
100%.
If you're interested and committed and want to do it, yeah, and so that's gratifying, and I'm glad that they have a chance to do that. I'm really glad to be a part of that. I'm, it's too bad that neither Georgetown at large or the public at large will ever fully know or understand that point.
Yeah.
It will always be seen as something special on the side that we're sort of doing for people, and we're kind of coddling them, and it's what people will think about them as students is the same thing that people thought about me as a student, right? It's all affirmative action. It's all something special
Right.
because it's not, special means it doesn't look like what we normally do.
Exactly.
And in the context of higher education, people sort of are hypnotized to believe that what we normally do is we educate the best. So if you're not here, then you're not the best. And if you wouldn't normally be here, but we went out and found you, then we're doing you a favor, not because you deserve it.
Mm. Yeah. No, seriously,
Doing you a favor to make ourselves look good.
yeah, I think genuinely, I feel like one, obviously, with my educational background as like a sociology major and
Mm,
studying public humanities, it's like I've always kind of had a maybe better understanding that like the importance of including marginalized voices,
mhm.
but being in this space and just listening to them.
Yeah,
Remember even the first class, I don't remember what exactly Kelly said, but he just said something so profound.
yeah.
You're like, I'm pointing that. Like
All right.
I remember you saying that. And it was just like, I'm generally like, these are the marginalized voices are generally probably some of the most important voices that anyone can ever learn from. And I think
Mm,
you're 100% correct, where it's like, it's incredibly disheartening where people like aren't going to be able to even just hear that or are willing
yeah.
to understand that. Um, so
You
yeah,
know, one of the first things I had them read a chapter of something that I had written,
yes.
and Casey came in and said, I was asking, I forget what the question was, but he was saying that he had counted the length of the sentences. He'd gone through and counted he counted like the number of words in the sentence to show how at one point the sentences got real short, and then there was some point the sentences got really longer, and then they got shorter. And that showed something about what was going on with the character. And I just looked at him and I said, nobody has ever done that.
Was that intentional?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he wasn't being intentional about it. That was something that he had done, thinking about, and it had to do with the language in the story and how the pace of the language changed and how that conveyed different emotions in the story. And so he had done that before we came to class
Right.
on his own. He said, "Well, let me look at this. So these sentences are really long." And I counted these sentences that were like, 9 words each, and then it gets to like 3 word sentences, and that shows. And I'm like,
They're actually incredibly intelligent. Like, oh
Yeah,
my goodness. Okay. Well, that kind of also answered my next question.
yeah,
So I
yeah.
guess the last thing I'll kind of leave us off on, or last two questions maybe. For you, what do you hope students can kind of walk away with at the end of this course? And yes, and if you can also share one takeaway from this course with educators beyond the prison walls, what would it be?
Okay. Well, I think the takeaway is confidence on two levels. Sort of more confident in their skill level as writers. And this is a little bit different because usually this is the first class they take because of the way this is sort of a half a cohort that sort of came in. So they've actually taken, this is not the first class they've taken, so they've already had classes where they've had to turn in papers without having their first writing class.
Mm,
So they turned in papers to professors who may not have been paying as much attention to the writing as we are. So they'll have more confidence about their writing skill. They'll know what they do well. They know the things that they have to work on, and they'll feel more comfortable working on those things and understanding, when they get certain feedback, sort of understanding, okay, that's because I forgot to do that thing, or yeah, I'm still supposed to be working on my commas or whatever. But yeah, I get it now. I know what I'm doing, and I'm still working on it. So there's that level of confidence, but also because of the kind of personal exploration they're doing, the reflection they're doing about themselves, um, and the empathy from the interaction with one another. Um, I think there will be a level of emotional confidence.
yeah,
Um, um, they will feel, I hope, um, more comfortable with themselves, that that they've spent a little bit of time, at least sort of thinking, looking at some of the things that they've come through, understanding how they have survived and how they are surviving, recommitting themselves to because just signing up for applying for the program is an expression of a commitment in their own sort of belief in their own futures, right?
yeah,
Even if whether they're getting out or not, that they a commitment in making themselves better people.
yeah,
Um, and they will have done some of that work. Apparently, this group is also all engaged in some level of therapy at Patuxent. Um, and I would hope that they would see some of the work that they're doing here in conjunction with that. I know a couple of them have said so. That it's carrying out, sort of bringing into the classroom some of the self reflection, self discovery that they've been doing in therapy as well. So that's my hope for them, that they will feel a little bit more whole, a little bit more healed. Um, and for other educators, just understanding that whatever the subject, if you can find ways to help students bring themselves into the subject,
mm,
um, you know, and it's obviously, in a lot of the humanities, it's easier. In some of the social sciences, it's easier. Um, but whatever, if you're talking about, sociology or psychology, but whatever the discipline, um, if you can find ways to encourage students to bring more of themselves into the work, um, that even if the class never really goes near whatever kinds of emotional baggage they may be bringing to it, whatever traumas they've been through. Um, Everybody's got a little something going on in their background. But if you can find a way to connect what people are doing in their studies to themselves at a deeper level, um, they'll do better, they'll get more out of it, and they'll get more out of the subject, and they will um, grow and heal some um, from that exercise.
Yeah. I know I said those were going to be the last two questions, but as you were
Right.
talking, I also
Yeah.
want to ask two more questions.
Uh,
I guess, yeah, I was just thinking about how, again, we are dealing with like a lot of emotional and vulnerable themes. But I'm just like also curious, like you as an educator, like how do you kind of process that yourself? Or, when we like had a student who talked about how he was feeling suicidal, like how do you kind of then have to either emotionally distance or at least make sure you don't?
well, it's probably easier for me than for a lot of instructors simply because of my background. Because for the last for 20 years at Georgetown, while I was teaching, that's what I was saying that I started missing. While I was teaching, I was also working with students in a lot of different capacities. We ran a lot of programs and different things. But what we were doing in my office, and I told the staff there that, all of the programs, whatever events we planned, whatever programs we did, our job really was to to help individual students. We were all sort of counselors in disguise in some way, right? And so, um, you may have been working with a student on a particular project, some kind of extracurricular activity, but you also wanted to be the person who was there when a student was ready to talk about what was bothering them. In the office where I worked, there were like six or seven of us. We had a suite, and everybody had a couch in their office.
Hmm. Nice.
And we, and we all had like two or three students who were like regular visitors to our couch. It was like,
But
and
there's
that was sort
like
of,
even just infrastructure can make a difference. So
yeah, yeah. And just sort of, so being somebody who was just willing to listen.
yeah,
So that had, I've been doing that the whole time that I was teaching, and so I really can't divorce the two. So that becomes part of my teaching. And that's what was frustrating me when before I started teaching at the prison, when I lost that context, when I was for a couple of years, I was just an adjunct who would show up on campus, walk into the classroom, teach the class, and they would leave.
yeah,
Right. And, there may be one or two that I would have a conversation with, but I didn't know who they were. I didn't know anything about their lives, as opposed to just being around all the time and people could drop by and, it's different. So even in the prison, even though we're not there that much, all the people that I have taught there, as we're walking through the halls and I see people who were in my class 2 years ago and say, hey, how you doing? And just, but there is a sense of, I know something about them. They trust me.
right,
If they needed something, they would feel comfortable asking, within the rules.
right.
Yeah, and so that's, finding ways to create those kinds of relationships. And it's, for a lot of instructors, it's hard. Actually, this program makes it easier than a lot of teaching does, because they are so eager to connect.
Yeah, very true. And then I guess last question, we are both Black educators, period. So I
Mhm.
guess one,
Yep.
I guess, how do you see that being significant in any educational setting, but also within the prison setting?
Um, I think it's huge. Um, and it was huge in one way on campus, and it's huge in a very different way at Patuxent.
Right.
Um, on campus, I was conscious of the fact that um, there were not a lot of Black instructors, even fewer Black male instructors. And so for a lot of the students at Georgetown, I was representing.
Mhm.
And I was always conscious of that, that I was representing something that they didn't see much of.
Yeah.
Um, it's kind of, Sidney Poitier syndrome. But it's real. So, that's just sort of on campus in general. For the a lot of the students that I was describing that we had the closer relationships with, because it was the multicultural office, which is probably now illegal. But so a lot of the students were that I interacted with on a regular basis were students of color. Um, and um, and so for them, I was, um, and all of us were kind of a refuge. And that office space with the couches is like, this is like, okay, this is where you can come and sort of be away from white Georgetown and just hang out and relax for a little while before you know. Um,
Go there.
and we were kind of the aunties and uncles, in that sense. Um, and it's similar, but I think more serious and more significant in the prison system. One, because my guess is that most of the students who we um, have never had a Black male instructor before, because most high schools don't have a lot. And I'm sure I'm not the first for all of them, but I'm sure I'm one of the few for most of them. So that's one. And then the other part of it is that just sort of in contrast to whereas the students at Georgetown are living in a very white environment, these students, I mean, you've seen the prison staff. There's a whole lot of Black folks in there, with keys on their belts.
Right. There's a
Um, the whatever they call them, CIs, COs, the guards. There's a lot of Black guards in there. Um, and so so we get to treat them humanely,
yes.
in ways that a lot of the other people, because even if they wanted to, they can't. Their job is, I'm treating you like, the way George Jackson described. It's like my job is to lock you up and keep you down.
Seriously.
There may be a couple of them who are, who are nice enough in passing. But I've even seen, students sort of getting into it with some of the guards, and even just some quick exchanges that are just kind of, tense, and they're not quite hostile. They're not, they're far from friendly. Um, so we represent, oh yeah, there are still, Black people who can come in here who like us and who are like on our side and treat us like human beings. And so I think they appreciate us for that.
Yeah. Awesome.
And I think it's important that, that I know you're aware of it, and I think it's important that we are aware of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Okay, well, awesome.
Okay,
You, Professor, for coming on here.
no problem. Yeah, it's fun. Thank you. Thank you for
Yeah.
this.
Yeah, I think obviously you offer like a lot of insightful advice, but just show the dynamics of education within various settings and why it's important. So yeah,
Yep.
thank you.
Okay, I'll see you tomorrow.
Well, I'll see you tomorrow.
Okay, take care.
You too. Bye.